What's up, everybody? It has been a grip since I've been updating, posting, anything like that. And I apologize, but at the same point, we all got our lives, right? But now it's time to get into some awesome content that I got in store for you guys. One of the coolest builds I've ever done. We're going to do some maintenance on this guy, get it ready to go to the dyno. So that's going to be exciting. So today, what we're going to be doing is going through, this has got lackluster oil pressure after the build. So one of the things at idle with this FD is lower oil pressure than what I'd like to see. And it could just be the gauge, but even going through, it does run a Heltec ECU. It's only showing like 37 PSI at idle, which is about 1,000 RPM. And then in revving, it just builds oil pressure like normal. Everything's cool. But the idle is less than ideal, and I don't like it. It does have oversized bearings and then a eccentric shaft modification that was already done on the car. So the oil pressure is going to be a little bit light, but there was no oil restrictor for the pressure regulators in the oil pan done. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to actually have to drop the oil pan out of this guy and check to see what's going on. We're going to do some troubleshooting, kind of show you guys what we're working with. Let's check out the before, and then once we get through and we actually identify what the issue is, we'll check the after. So let's get at it, and let's start the sucker up, see what we got.
All right, so joke of the day, Kane. What is the difference between a hippo and a zippo?
What is it?
One's really, really heavy, and the other one's just a little lighter.
All right, so let's get this guy somewhat running here. Pretty sweet. We'll hook up the Heltec here and just hit the connect on there. This computer's slow as shit, sorry, but it is what it is. Just looking for ECU, handshaking. Let's see what we got. And then we'll fire it up. We'll look at the cold start because this has not been running, nothing. She's cold. And we'll just check to see what it is at cold start and then let it warm up for a little bit and then just see what it's at idle after warm up. I know we don't have much gas in here, a little less than a quarter of a tank, but it should be enough to fire it up and run it for a little bit. But pretty crazy interior in this guy. I mean, this thing is pretty awesome for like just a street ripper FD right-hand drive. So we'll let this thing fire up. Like I said, the computer is slow, so
Now we're running. So 1,000 RPM at idle, cold start, water temp 174, oil temp 102. The pressure, cold start was at like 60, and now it's down to 23. So something's going on with having that low oil pressure. Now, it could be there's no thermal bypass in the oil cooler system. There's no thermal bypass, or just not enough restriction in our oil pressure regulators, whether it be the front of the front cover or the rear cast iron. So I'm going to say there's just not enough. And on here even, like we can see, I'd like to see that a little bit higher. We'd like to be at least 40 to 50 PSI oil pressure at idle. And we're only at about 25, 30. So we want that higher, for sure. I'd like to see that higher. So, in doing so, we're gonna end up dropping the pan. But this gives me a good baseline of where we're at, you know. Oil temperature is going to get hotter, which that number is going to probably go down even more. And we don't want to be anything less than like 30 PSI. gonna throw this on the dyno. I wanna make sure that this thing's got great oil pressure and no issues. So we'll start there and we'll get the oil pan off. But definitely, I mean, the oil pressure sensor for where we're at on the gauge. So oil pressure sensor's right back here off the feed. And then the dash one is in the stock location. So, I mean, both of them are reading pretty much identical to what we're seeing from the ECU and the dash itself. So, best place to start, basically take off the oil pan under here. So we'll take the oil pan off, and then once the pan is off, we'll actually be able to see what is causing this, whether the oil pressure regulator on the front for where it's basically letting, there's springs there that you can shim, whether there's not enough tension there or something is backed out, basically creating a bypass for the oil pressure to be able to get out. Something is making it where we're lacking oil pressure somewhere. So let's get it fixed. All right, so first step on this project, basically we're gonna just support the engine basically with this engine cradle. That's gonna hold the engine up. So FDs actually mount from the back of the subframe. And what we're gonna do is just hold the motor up so we don't have to take the engine out. And then underneath, we're just gonna take off the crossmember. So we're gonna take all the crossmember out, leave the steering rack and the engine in place. We'll just unbolt the motor mounts themselves on both sides and drop this whole crossmember down to be able to then get to the oil pan, and we'll take the oil pan off. So I'll get to removing the crossmember right now and the engine subframe. We'll take all this out and then see what we're working with. Well, 45 minutes later, whew, I'm sweaty. And subframe's out. So got the subframe out of the car, 45 minutes. I mean, legitimately, it's just a couple, handfuls of bolts and nuts to get that thing out of there. And now we have a fresh look at the oil. Looking underneath here, looks like oil pan definitely got a little warm. Obviously, the epoxy paint that was used on there is kind of dying off, unfortunately. But all the welds on the oil pan still look immaculate, which is great. Just some of that VHT, I think, is what was used on here, the wrinkle paint. So that did not survive, which we could just clean that off and just go just a natural billet aluminum pan look on there. But yeah, I mean, no real leaks or anything underneath here. Oh, there's a leaf right there. But nothing to really draw any concern on anything, so that's good. Might have to tighten that one in, but yeah, all the underneath here looks good. So basically our culprit for oil pressure is going to be the front of the front cover. There's an oil pressure regulator right here with a spring behind it. And then in the back here, there is another rear oil pressure regulator for the rear of the engine. So it's either that side or that side. I think it's this side. But yeah, so we'll go through that guy there and we will see what we got. But everything here looks good. Everything's out of the way. So we'll just get all these 10mm bolts, and I believe those are 17s in the back for the motor mounts. And that oil pan's gonna come out of there pretty easy. So let's get it out and see what we get. Also, just to be sure, obviously I gotta drain the oil. So I got the oil drain behind me here. And then in doing that, I also wanted to make sure I used a really clean pan and then kind of just run a rag through it over the top and just kind of see if there's any material, right? Because the other cause for concern is bearings. So we want to make sure that those are also healthy and good. So that's the other part to this, is make sure that there's no bearing material. So once we actually physically drop the pan, we should also be able to inspect that and verify that there's no residue inside the pan as well. But I'm not seeing anything in the oil at the moment. There's no glitter, no nothing like that. Very clean oil. It is very... I would say pungent with fuel odor. So definitely a little bit rich in fueling. So with that can also cause the oil to really thin out.
over time. So that also could be something as well. But I know that after the car drove, I would say every 500 to 1,000 miles, 500 to 1,000 miles, kept on seeing this low oil pressure deal. So it could be fuel related, but at the same point, we're going to take all the precautions as necessary and make sure that this thing's tip top before we go to the dyno. So let's get the pan off now that the oil's drained out, and we should be able to further inspect. All right, let's get all these studs out.
Like the fact that these are studded makes my life a whole lot easier. The pan itself is 100% good. Not one leak in the pan, which is great. So definitely the larger flange from the aluminum oil pan, and then the stud kit, put studs in and then nuts on top.
All right, let's go for first look at the oil pan. Everything looked like it was doing its job in here. So baffle looks good. We'll dump out some of this oil and just see what we get. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loosen it, and then I'm going to dump it in with a filter, kind of to be able to do like a catch-all for the material that's going to come out of this pan. So then we'll see if we have any bearing material in there with a clean paper towel. And then we'll dump out all the oil that's in the bottom, because that's where most of your sediment is going to be. So we'll just grab another paper towel, act as our filter, and let's try this puppy out and see what we get. So let's just dump her out. Just let it kind of just filter right through this paper towel. Kind of just let it sit like this for about 10-15 minutes. And then we'll see what we have in the paper towel after we're done. And then just kind of check inside the pan and see if there's any material in the bottom of the pan. All right, while we let the oil pan drain, let's get our first look underneath this guy. Okay. So our rear oil pressure regulator looks like she's nice and crushed, so that's good. Nothing's backed out on here, so that's good. All the oil looks really nice and clean. Let's check to see. Front cover gasket looks good. I don't see any blowout on that. So the front cover's holding, so that's good. You can see the gasket's still in there. It's not blown out, so that's awesome. So yeah, the only thing I can think of is we just have some restriction in our oil system, or not enough. So we'll look to our pressure regulator. So we're going to change this pressure regulator out, and then we're going to see if we have any shims in the front, which that'll tell us where our oil is going. I don't see anything on the gasket for here. Looks good for our pickup tube. So that gasket's good. No issues or cause for concerns on that. Yeah. Well, we have some work to do. Let's see what we find. Things that are interesting to me. I did go through everything. So the pickup tube, everything looks good here. Nothing clogged. Everything looks good in the filter, screen pickup. Gasket was in there, so that's good. We did have 2 shims, which is great. So there's 2 shims in the front oil pickup, or the oil regulator of the front cover. The one thing that's kind of concerning to me, the rear regulator is super sticky. And it's almost like it's binding and it's not letting any oil out of the actual drain on here, which is interesting. Like the pressure itself, it's very tight. And then when I use one that, a different one, it's definitely a lot looser. And this one is crushed as well. And this one is crushed, which I've crushed these, and this one's not crushed as much as this one, yet this one has way more tension on it. So more to come here as we investigate. But I'm going to say that this pressure regulator might have wiped out the front cover O-ring gasket. It could have just pushed it right through, bleeding off oil pressure right out that gasket. So, search continues. So we're still going to look. Oh, I got oil all over my freaking eyebrow too. You got that slick look. So I'm gonna continue going through here and see, might just be an easy swap out with the pressure regulator and put this thing back together. But looking in the oil pan, everything's clean, so no bearing material, so that's great. So the thing did have enough oil pressure where it didn't wipe out any bearings, so no concerns there. But yeah, kind of stumped. I gotta put this all together. So hate to bring any downer on this because it is exciting to be able to kind of go through, troubleshoot, figure out what's going on. Obviously, so oil pressure regulator, definitely an issue there. So that's gonna get swapped out. We're gonna put a new oil pressure regulator in. The front oil pressure return on the front cover, we're gonna shim it one extra shim, and really hoping once I put it back together, just the oil pan on. I'm not gonna put the subframe on yet, just to be sure and verify that we do get better oil pressure. Now, the pressure will get better. The pressure will get better due to just putting fresh oil in it. So, but I'd like to see that oil pressure at 80 versus 60 on cold start, and then maintain at like 40, 45. So that's kind of the goal here. Now, if it doesn't, and it still does the exact same thing, then it leads me to believe it's the front cover O-ring that's in there. But we gotta take apart the entire front of the engine to inspect that. Now, taking apart the entire front of the engine, not an easy task. So I'm not really looking forward to that if that's the case. But the eccentric shaft was modified prior to me building it. And what that does is it puts larger oiling jets in the eccentric shaft, which bleeds off more oil pressure, as well as it does have Stillway aftermarket oil coolers, which don't have a thermal bypass in them to hold the pressure in. But once that operating temp is up to operating temp with the thermal bypass in there to run both front oil coolers, because it's got dual front oil coolers, then the pressure would just go back to what it was and circulating the system. So that's hard for me to believe. I think that it's going to be the rear pressure regulator is going to be the culprit, and or the front O-ring could have blown out, and it could be weeping by that front cover gasket. But again, there's no distortion in the gasket. The gasket's not cracked. You can see it's completely sealed all the way around, hasn't blown out. So I'm thinking that that's where this is gonna go. So we're gonna put this thing back together, put the oil pan back on, fire up with some new oil, and we'll run the log and see what we got. Well, now that everything's all cleaned up, we got the pan, we got the oil regulators ready to go, as well as the oil pickup tube. Underneath the engine's all clean, so it's ready to get the RTV laid on there. I'll basically time-lapse this deal, and let's get this thing wrapped up. All right, so we got the oil pan in. I'm gonna let the RTV dry for a little bit before I torque it all the way down. Everything should be ready to go for tomorrow. Fill it up with oil, and we'll see where we're at. So I'm gonna take the night, keep my fingers crossed that this is gonna work out. But I really enjoy it. If you guys have made it this far in the video, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Hopefully, before the end of this, we're gonna see that we've corrected it, or there's gonna be another video of me having to take apart the entire front end of this car. But remember, like, subscribe, and let's get this thing oiled up, started in just a couple of minutes for you, but tomorrow for me. And we're on to the next day. So check the oil pan. Everything's dry for the RTV, as well as the engine's now full of oil. So no leaks. So that's a plus, right? Don't have the cross member or the engine subframe on still. We're just going to use the engine support bracket to start the car and check the oil pressure. So let's get to it. We'll hop in the car and let's do a cold start, see where we're at. All right. So we're in the car. Let's just see. Oh, we got a little bit of stuff on the camera lens there. There we go. All cleaned up. So what do we got here? What is this one? That's just the thermal couplers. We'll erase that because it was off. All right. So we got oil pressure. So we can see right there is our oil pressure. Let's just see what that goes to. Let's crank her up. The only thing that it actually did change though is the oil pressure. Now when revving it, before it would get to like 67 PSI, now it only goes to like 48. And it seems like it's holding pressure regulated at 48 PSI. So with that, leads me to believe something else is going on. The O-ring in the front cover could have got spit into the oil coolers. It could have just got forced out, and there's blow by there that I can't see, maybe even on the top of that gasket, but we can see I'm at 165 oil temp, 184 degrees coolant temp. Both rotors are running pretty much identical, within like 50 degrees of each other for EGTs. And then we look here at oil pressure, it's basically about the same, 21 to 22, and with that it was 22, 23 at this temperature previously before. We know that the engine's great. I mean, we're running great vacuum for a rotary at 15 pounds vacuum. Great EGTs, air fuel ratios are perfect, idling great, fans are turning on, everything in the systems are working. It's just you watch when I rev it, the oil pressure it goes up, but it definitely does not do what it needs to do. So with that, let's shut the car off and we'll assess. Well, on that note, I was really hoping that I wouldn't have to take this front cover off this engine. But I don't think that there's any choice to be able to fully investigate this. Like, this car's got to go on the dyno. It's going to be driven hard by who owns it, that kind of thing. I don't want to risk it and say the oil pressure is what it is and everything's fine, especially when I can manipulate it with like the different oil pressure regulators, which was really weird and sporadic for how the other one worked. And now this one, it should be at 40 PSI at idle, and at least 60, 80 on cold start, especially with fresh oil in it. I wouldn't really see it to go below that. I will say, these still weight oil coolers, I'm gonna have to do some research on them as well. They might have oil thermostats in them, because when it reached a certain temperature, both oil coolers just automatically started flowing, as well as the pressure went from like 44 to 25, like instantly. So those could be driving like 15 PSI of pressure, but it doesn't explain to me by changing the rear pressure regulator on the engine, one that really didn't open at all to one that moved freely. Now it seems like the oil system's working correctly. It's just low. So, which leads me to believe that that front cover O-ring that's in there blew out. And what happens when it blows out is it gets pushed out into the oil system, which the first part that this system goes to is the oil cooler. So it just gets basically blown out and pushed out, and the oil itself just starts spraying out of the front cover gasket, where we might not be able to see. I can only see the bottom ring around. It could be on that top side of the front cover gasket that's blown out, or that O-ring got chewed up. Something happened where we're losing pressure somewhere. So further investigation, that's just my current speculation. It could be completely different. All I know, front end of the engine has to come apart to be able to get to and assess the rest of the oil system. Hell, it could be even the oil pump is just no good anymore. Maybe it needs a new oil pump. That is also part of the front end oil assembly. If it needs a new oil pump, it needs a new oil pump. I mean, there could be multiple things. But to keep this video from going too long, I am going to upload this one, and you guys can get entertainment for a couple days here. And as soon as I get the front cover, everything torn apart, figure out what the issue is, I'm gonna let you guys know in the next video to come. But for now, we'll check you rotary nerds later.